Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the messengers in our home. Dear Kardec Radio listeners, welcome to another chapter of the messengers in our home. Tonight we're going to talk about chapter 7, Otavio's downfall. Very interesting and very insightful case, but more to that in a little while. Hello Mackenzie, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Hi Francisca, and hello dear friends of Kardec Radio. Welcome back to another chapter of the messengers in our home.
And as usual, we invite you all for our opening prayer. Let's take a moment, take a deep breath, letting go of our days, and concentrating, elevating our thoughts to the higher spheres. Connecting to God, first cause of all things, and the highest intelligence in the universe. Dear Mother, Father God, with our hearts filled with gratitude and joy, we thank you for all the blessings we receive in our lives and the many opportunities to learn and to grow every day. We also thank you for our health, our homes, and the learning opportunities we have at Kardec Radio about the life in the spiritual realm and the spiritual teachings in general. We would like to welcome the spiritual benefactors who are here with us, helping us to open our hearts and minds so that the teachings of tonight's chapter not only talk to our minds, but especially warm our hearts and motivate us to put them into practice in our daily lives. Please help and inspire us wherever we are. So be it. And now let us delve into the reading of chapter 7.
Chapter 7, Otavio's downfall. Aniceto's absence gave us a chance for some interesting conversation in groups. I was impressed by the two women who had asked for arrangements to be made for Otavio, so I asked Vicente to introduce me to them, not because I was moved by ordinary curiosity, but because I wanted to obtain new insight into mediumistic work which Telesforo's lecture had made me look at in a different light. My friend kindly indulged me. In a few moments, I found myself not only in the company of the sisters Isaura and Isabel, but of Otavio himself, a pale gentleman who looked to be about 40. I too am new here, I explained, and my situation is that of a doctor who failed in the duties that the Lord entrusted to me. Otavio smiled and replied, "Perhaps, my friend, it was to your advantage to not have known the eternal truths when you were in the world. That is not true in my case, I'm sorry to say. I wasn't ignorant of the upright path that the Father had assigned to me for my struggles on the earth. I possessed no official titles of competence. However, I did receive a noteworthy evangelical education, something that is of great importance for the eternal life, and of greater importance than an intellectual education per se. I had generous friends from the higher planes, and they made themselves visible to me. I received messages full of love and wisdom, yet I fell slave to imprudence and vanity. Otavio's remarks had a profound impact. When I was in the world, I had had no special contact with Spiritism. Consequently, I was having a hard time understanding everything he wanted to say. I was unaware of the extent of the responsibilities involved in being a medium, I said. Spiritual duties, replied Otavio, somewhat downcast, are concerned with eternal interests, and that's why my failure was so bad. The stewards of the soul's assets are endowed with extremely heavy responsibilities. The studious, the believers, the sympathizers in the arena of faith may allege ignorance and inhibition. However, the clergy have no excuse. The same applies to mediums. Disciples of beneficiaries in the temples of the new revelation may claim certain impediments, but missionaries live with a storehouse of such conviction that nothing can exonerate them from the guilt they amass. But my friend, I asked, highly impressed, what could have caused your moral immolation? You seem so aware of yourself, so highly informed about the laws of life, that it's hard to believe that you think you need new experiences in that regard. The two women had a strange gleam in their eyes as Otavio replied, I will tell you about my downfall, and you will see how I wasted a wonderful opportunity to evolve. And after a lengthy pause, he continued grimly. After having acquired enormous debts in the physical realm in another lifetime, I came to knock at the gates of No Solar. I was assisted by dedicated brothers and sisters who worked tirelessly with me. For the next 30 years, I prepared myself to return to Earth to work as a medium, wishing to settle my accounts and to evolve in some way. There was no lack of truly sublime lessons or holy incentives for my imperfect heart. The folks in the Ministry of Communication did all they possibly could on my behalf, and 6 spirit friends in particular went to great lengths to help me be successful. Technicians from the Ministry of Assistance accompanied me to Earth on the day before my rebirth. I received a strong, healthy body. According to the magnanimity of my benefactors here, I was to be granted highly important work in the area of consoling others. I would be among the ranks of workers in charge of Brazil, encouraging their efforts and assisting ignorant, disturbed, or unhappy brothers and sisters. I wasn't supposed to get married, not because it might interfere with my mediumship, but because my own particular case demanded that I not marry. Even though I was to be single at the age of 20, I would welcome the 6 friends who had worked so hard for me in No Solar. They would come into my life as orphans. I was greatly indebted to these spirits, and this provision would not only be a pleasant means of redemption for me, but also a guarantee of victory through my work of assisting them. This, in turn, would guard my heart against imprudence and distraction, because such a demanding way of life would keep me from succumbing to degrading ideas regarding sex and unrestrained ambition. It was also decided that my new activities would begin with much sacrifice, so that any prospective love from a possible wife wouldn't weaken my energy for achievement, so that my task wouldn't be enslaved to capricious worldly situations that were far outside Jesus' designs, and above all, so that the impersonal nature of my service would be maintained. Consequently, over the years of my spiritual growth, I would be sent more and more material relief from No Solar to the degree that I demonstrated self-denial, detachment from ephemeral possessions, and disinterest in gratifying the senses. This would, in turn, enable me to progressively intensify the sowing of love entrusted into my hands. With everything in place, I went back, not only promising loyalty to my instructors, but also pledging the assurance of my devotion to my 6 spirit friends, to whom I owe so much, even now. Otavio paused again, sighed deeply, and continued. But too bad. I forgot about every single one of my commitments. My benefactors in No Solar placed me alongside a true servant of Jesus, my mother, who had been a Christian spiritist since her youth. And despite my father's materialistic tendencies, he was, nevertheless, a moral man. My mother discarnated when I was 13, and I received the first calls from the higher realms when I was 15. At that time, my father remarried, and in spite of the kindness and cooperation that my stepmother offered me, I assumed an attitude of false superiority towards her. My birth mother directed sacred appeals to my heart from the invisible world, but to no avail. I was very rebellious and complained all the time. Some relatives took me to a spiritist center that had an excellent evangelical orientation, a place where my faculties could be put to use for the needy and suffering. However, I lacked the character of a loyal and faithful worker. My refusal to trust in my spirit guides and my pronounced propensity for criticizing what others did drove me to an unpleasant standstill. My esteemed friends in the invisible realms encouraged me to serve, but in my unwholesome vanity, I doubted them. And because the sacred calls continued, which I interpreted as hallucinations, I sought out a doctor who told me that what I needed was sex. I had reached the age of 19, and I yielded to the unbridled abuse of my sublime faculties. I wanted to force the harmony between sinful pleasure and spiritual duty, and this alienated me more and more from the evangelical teachings that friends from the higher spheres were ministering to us. I had just turned 20 when my father was snatched away by death. With this sad occurrence, 6 unfortunate children were orphaned, because when my stepmother married my father, she brought 3 little ones under his guardianship. In vain, the poor widow begged for my help. I never even pretended to accept the redemptive duties for which I was destined. After 2 years of her second widowhood, my poor stepmother was taken to a leper colony. Filled with terror, I abandoned the little orphans forever, without reflecting on the fact that I was handing my generous creditors from No Solar over to an uncertain fate. Next, giving free rein to my indolence, I committed a dishonorable act and was forced to marry. Even then, the calls from the invisible world persisted, revealing the inexhaustible mercy of the Most High. But as I forgot my duties more and more, every attempt at spiritual accomplishment became more difficult. And so, the tragedy that I had created for my own torment continued. My wife, to whom I had gotten married only for unspeakably lustful purposes, was a creature far beneath my spiritual level. She was bound to a monstrous spirit and attracted it to play the role of my son. The company of those 6 affectionate children would have contributed significantly to my moral security, but I had relegated them to the street. My spouse and son were put in charge of exacting their revenge, so it seemed to me. They both tormented me to the end of my days, whereupon I returned here, barely having reached the age of 40, consumed by syphilis, alcohol, and financial problems, having done nothing for my eternal future, having constructed nothing in the arena of the good. He wiped his moist eyes and concluded, "As you can see, I fulfilled all my damnable desires, but not the will of God. That is why I failed and exacerbated my old debts." He fell silent, as though something invisible had closed his throat. I embraced him with brotherly sympathy, eager to offer his heart encouragement, but Izora caressed the side of his head and said,
"Don't cry, my son. Jesus doesn't withhold the blessing of time from us. Be calm and courageous."
And recognizing her affection for him, I meditated on divine goodness, whose sublime hymn is echoed in motherly love, even in the regions beyond the grave. If you've been following us, last chapter we talked about the warnings that Telesforo gave us on his lecture about returning to Earth and what the tasks that we need to perform and how we need to perform those tasks, and for us to remember our responsibilities. After he finishes his lecture, we find Andre and Vicente talking, and then we see Aniceto also. And then there comes 2 women to ask in favor of Otavio. In this chapter, number 7, is when we finally meet Otavio, and we know the names of those 2 women, and we know Otavio's history once he was incarnated on Earth. So that's basically the setup for this chapter here, when we're gonna talk about a regular man who had the chance, and to some degree a mission that was set up for him with his agreement on the spiritual plane in No Solar, after a certain number of years of preparation to go back to Earth as we are right now, incarnated, and to solve some of his own problems so that he could finally undo or reconstruct, rebuild some of his own mistakes, some of the mistakes that he made in a previous incarnation. And that's what we find in the very beginning of this chapter, chapter number 7. Andre remembers those 2 women. Well, he doesn't remember, right? Although it takes a week for us to go back to another chapter of this story, this is happening very quickly, right? We just had a lecture. They were talking at the end of the lecture, and then they hear these 2 women come to Aniceto to ask in favor of Otavio. They go back to a different type of conversation, and then Andre remembers those 2 women and wants to know a little bit more about them. And that's what he says here, right? He was impressed by those 2 women that asked for arrangements to be made for Otavio. And so he asked Vicente, Andre asks Vicente to introduce himself to those 2 women, and probably to Otavio too. And he points out that it is it is not just because of ordinary curiosity, but because he wants to know a little bit more about mediumistic work. And we already know, for those who already read the whole book, that most of these stories, and if we remember those chapters 5 and 6, where Telesphore is giving us that lecture, that he is talking about mediumistic work or becoming the message, relaying the message, right, through mediumistic work or through our own words. So Andre here is interested in knowing a little bit more about mediumistic work. He will make it clear later on that, remember, he was not a spiritist when he was incarnated in his last incarnation. So he doesn't know anything about this mediumship thing, right? If we could talk about mediumship like this. So he wants to know a little bit more about mediumship. So he will not be asking personal questions only because of ordinary curiosity. And that's a big call for us once we are in a type of work or in a type of conversation with people, that curiosity should be taken out of the question, because it does not matter to us what the other person's story is with regards of entering very small details and just talking for talking. And remember, on the end of last chapter, right, when Vicente was explaining to Andre that once we are having useful and constructive conversation, specifically there in No Solar, they are receiving as if they are working. But once they start not talking or not using their time of conversation in groups usefully, that time will not be counted as useful work. Therefore, they will not be counted as if they are working. So this curiosity thing that he mentions here is just for us to remember. If we are in the Spiritist Center, if we are working with talking to people, let's make a huge effort to stay out of the curiosity zone. We need to get to the main details or main facts, better saying, not main details, main facts that can lead to the understanding of the problem, and so that we and the spirits who are together with us can guide us in giving better counsel or having an insight on what the problem is. Not of mere curiosity, but the sincere and heartfelt desire to help the person that's with us. So that's what Andres is conveying to us here. So Vicente goes and takes Andre to meet Isaura and Isabel, and we find out later on, and that's at close to the end of the chapter, that Isaura was, while incarnated, the mother of Otavio, was Otavio's mother. And as we've been doing so far, Isaura, as a name of a woman, is it can mean a few different things, but it's very interesting that one of the meanings can say gentle breeze, and one of the meanings of Isaura is gentle breeze. It is very interesting how at the end of the chapter she speaks to Otavio, and we will go back to that once we reach the end of the chapter. And Otavio, it's interesting because the main thing for Otavio's name, or the main meaning of Otavio, is that he's the eighth of a list. It's a Roman name, a Latin name, but it's interesting also that one of the biggest characters in our history is Octavius Augustus. He was one of the best emperors that Rome ever had, and he was born and he ruled around when Jesus was born. And it's called an Augustus time because it was when there was most economic and cultural progress, and there was more peace in Rome. It was when Octavius Augustus was there. So And although it was a peaceful time, or a more peaceful time than other times in Rome history, if we go back to remember what Jesus said to us about peace, when he says, "It is not the peace of the world that I give to you, but my peace that I wish upon you." So it is very interesting that even though it was a peaceful time, it was not the kind of peace that Jesus wanted for us, because it was a superficial kind of peace, right? It was a peaceful time for when he would be able to come and to spread the message, or to try to spread the message, but it was not even close to what the peace that he was proposing to us. So in this case, maybe that's the connection that I find here between this Otavio name with the Emperor Rome, right? Since we already read the chapter, we all know that although he needed to find that peace in the spiritual realm, or the spiritual kind of peace that he needed to really achieve what he needed to achieve with regards to the errors that he made in a previous incarnation, he didn't seek for that peace in work, but he searched for that peace on the exterior side. So leaving all his duties, all the things that he promised to himself to do when he was incarnated. So it is very interesting for us to relate his name with Octavius Augustus' name, the Emperor of Rome, which ruled up to more or less, as historians say, to the year 14 of our common era, which is more or less 14 after Christ, as we're more used to, but these days they prefer to say the year 14 of the common era. So, coming back to his story, Andre tells that we finally meet Isaura, Isabel, and Otavio, and that Otavio was more or less 40 years old, and he was very pale, meaning that probably he was still very sick and very sad by what had just happened to him, discarnated, spending probably a few years or some time suffering because of his own doing, and then he comes to No Solar and are here now being helped by Isaura and Isabel. And then Andre introduces himself and tries to minimize, or to put Otavio in a position of, hey, look, we are all here, we all suffer, we are all the same, so don't worry too much. I am new here, Andre says, and my situation, or Andre's situation, is that, well, I was a doctor, and I failed in the duties that the Lord entrusted to him. So he's trying to put up a good conversation with Otavio and making him cheer up a little bit. And then Otavio smiles and replied, well, yeah, you're probably right, but it was to your advantage that you didn't know the eternal truths when you were in the world. And here comes I wouldn't say a very sensitive topic, but something that we really need to think about. Because once we decide to really follow a spiritual path, or to learn about the spiritual laws of the eternal life, it comes much more responsibility. Because we know more, or at least we are trying to know more. So what Otavio is telling us here is that, well, those who don't know, have the advantage of explaining, hey, I don't know, right? It's not that you're not going to be in fault, but at least you will be able to say that, well, I didn't know that. I actually didn't know that. Nobody ever taught me that. But once we know, what is our responsibility once we know? If we think about, let's say, the constitution of the countries, right? We cannot use the argument before a judge, oh, I didn't know that was a fault. Well, everybody needs to know the constitution, right? Everybody needs to know the laws. So this is not an excuse that I can use. Although the law itself tells us that if we are a first-time offender, we will not be judged as harshly as if I were a repeat offender. So here's the more or less to this interpretation, it is more or less the same thing, right? And that's why Otavio says, that's not true in my case. I am very sorry to say. Because he was not ignorant of the upright path that the Father had assigned to him for his struggles on the earth. He didn't have any special titles, any official titles of competence, but he was and he received a noteworthy evangelical education, right? So he knew the gospel. He knew the teachings of Jesus. He knew that the kingdom of God is not a material kingdom of God, but it's a kingdom that we need to build within ourselves. These days we keep using this word kingdom, right? And it's just because it's there written. But since we don't live in a kingdom anymore, we live in a democracy. So we could say, oh, let's build this society of God within ourselves, right? This place of God within ourselves. Let's build a better society, a society of God wherever we are, but not a physical better society only. We need to build it here also, but it's for us to extrapolate and go beyond that. And then that's what he keeps saying. Something that is of great importance for the eternal life and of greater importance than an intellectual education per se. So he received this knowledge of the kingdom of God that is of a great importance for eternal life, much more than the chemistry, the physics, the geometry, mathematics, language, than anything intellectual that we receive here per se. Not saying that it is not important. It is very important to receive this intellectual education. But differently than what Andre received, although he said that his parents were very good ones, at least he says this about his mother a few times, but he doesn't mention that he was really educated in this perception of the eternal life as of being an eternal life, a real, well, I wouldn't say eternal, right? Because it's not eternal to the past, but it's eternal or infinite to the future, meaning that we are immortal ones. So Otavio here is saying, I was educated knowing of this truth, of how I will continue. You were not, Andre. And this makes a huge difference in my life and in your life. Because I knew, I smoke. In the past, like let's say 100 years ago or more, smoke was something that nobody probably even related to, why am I coughing so much? Why did some people die so early? But these days, we all know how bad to smoke is. So, and who can say these days, on this age, that they don't know that smoking is bad for your health, right? So we don't have that excuse anymore. That's what Otavio is trying to convey to us here. And he even goes further when he says, I had generous friends from the higher planes, and they made themselves visible to me. So he was a medium, and these friends were being seen by Otavio and were telling him, giving him hints on what to do and how to behave. But then, and then he goes on, right? I received messages full of love and wisdom, yet I fell slave to imprudence and vanity. So this is if the chapter stopped right here, if we didn't know more details, that would be in and on itself a very, very tough call to all of us, even if we are not mediums. Because a person that is telling his own story and telling us and showing us that, well, we are receiving evangelical education, right? The ones who are listening to this right now, we are pretty sure that all of us know at least a little bit of evangelical education. We either go to a Spiritist center, we either went to a Spiritist center in the past, or even if we didn't go, we already read some stories on the Bible, We already read some stories of good people around the world, of good philosophers, of Jesus himself, right? Telling us some stories, showing us what to do, how we need to behave, and how are we doing with these messages? What are we doing with them? Let's go out a little bit of this evangelical education here for a second, and let's go to Facebook, for example, or to any other social network around there. How many good messages of love and wisdom we see on our timelines? All those wonderful sentences, quotes from good people, from people that try to show us good paths of behavior. But what are we doing with those messages full of love and wisdom that we've been receiving throughout our lives? This is the question that Otavio is making us think about here with this very first paragraph that he's saying. And he has a lot more to say here. Well, this first chapter, this first talk of him, makes a huge, a profound impact in him. Because, like Andres says, when he was in the world, he had no special contact with Spiritism. And Otavio already was in contact with Spiritism, which, once again, calls us, the Spiritists, who are right now studying and going to a Spiritist center. But Andre goes a little further, saying that, well, he was having a hard time understanding everything he wanted to say, because he didn't understand, as we said in the beginning of the program today, that Andre didn't know anything about Spiritism. So that's one of the reasons why he wanted to know Otavio's story and talk to Isabel and Isaura, right? So Andre goes and say, okay, I was unaware of the extent of the responsibilities involved in being a medium. We need to stop and think now. Although Otavio apparently is talking about himself being a medium, the paragraph that we just read of Otavio speaking doesn't necessarily connect only to those who are mediums, or ostensible mediums, as we usually say, because mediums we all are, as we already said a few times in the past. But once we have a deep responsibility within mediumship itself, then this responsibility is really higher. And it's almost a mission. And as a missionary is not to be famous, is not to become better than others, but to be a missionary is to become better than yourself. If I would be, or if somebody out there is a missionary, the main task is to become better than you were the day before. That's our task also. But if you're a missionary and you're not doing this, then there's something wrong. And that's what happened to Otavio. He just didn't want to do that. He just wanted to do what he had in mind and forgot everything about the other life, about the continuation of life, to live only the material life. That's what he starts by saying in the next paragraph when he says, somewhat downcast. Spiritual duties are concerned with eternal interests, and that's why his failure was so bad. Because it's not with the temporary interests. It's the spiritual duties are concerned with interests that are much more important than these temporary, physical, material interests, the material life that we are living right now. The stewards of the soul's assets are endowed with extremely heavy responsibilities. So we, the ones who are working at a Spiritist center, being a medium, giving lectures, here at Kardec Radio, we are endowed with extremely heavy responsibilities. What are we doing with those responsibilities? are we putting them up front and really sticking to them? That's a heavy call to all of us. And within this us, I'm talking about myself included, naturally, because that's what we are doing here, right? But he goes on even further. The studious, the believers, the sympathizers in the arena of faith may allege ignorance and inhibition. So I can say, or somebody can say, oh, I'm just a believer, I'm just a sympathizer, I'm just studying the doctrine, or I'm just studying this book right now, and maybe I didn't know better. I only read 1 or 2 books. However, the clergy have no excuse. What is this, the clergy? Naturally, this is a very religious word, right? It conveys to us the idea of a priest, of the pope, of the bishops, and all the clergy, or meaning all the ones who are responsible for that doctrine or for that religion, and so on and so forth. In Spiritism, there is no clergy to this extent. But then he makes Otavio here makes us think about what is this clergy. The same applies to mediums. Disciples of beneficiaries in the temples of the new revelation may claim certain impediments, but missionaries live with a storehouse of such conviction that nothing can exonerate them from the guilt they amass. So what he's saying here is that maybe we are just disciples, maybe we are just beneficiaries when we go to the Spiritist Center. That's why he put temples of the new revelation, right? The new revelation here naturally being Spiritism. So maybe we only call ourselves a believer, or I'm just studying right now, I'm just a sympathizer of Spiritism. So he's calling us here to think about who am I, right, in a gear of the Spiritist Center that I go to, right? What is my responsibility within the Spiritist Center, within the Spiritist group, organization that I go to? Am I a missionary? And with the word missionary, once again, is a word of responsibility, is a word that he employs here, saying that you, I, anyone has a very deep necessity of work. Not a necessity of showing up or of appearing in front of everybody. No, a very deep necessity of work because of the needs of that spirit. Not because the others need help, but because I, as a missionary, would need that work to improve myself and to give back what I took from the divine life that was given to me. So, doing and performing that work would be a necessity for me, not something that would make me be seen as a better person or as a celebrity. And that's why I love when he finishes the first paragraph when he says that he fell slave to imprudence and vanity. What is it that we see so much in these celebrities these days? And not only these days, don't we see a lot of vanity out there? Not criticizing them. Vanity to some degree is important. Not in the sense of a guilt or a sin, but in the sense of, I need to be presentable, right? When I go out, I need to, be well shaved, try to look and be as clean as possible, right? But once we put an overtone of vanity, that's when things start to get a little beyond our control. And maybe that's what he is trying to convey to us here. Falling slave to imprudence and to vanity. How are we on that scale? And that's the question that Otavio is posing to us. Andre is really impressed now by everything that he is saying. And he asks, what could have caused your moral immolation, right? What could have caused the necessity that you seem to need to sacrifice again. Because, look, and I almost see Andre here saying different words. Naturally, he's writing, so he needs to put things clearly and not to waste too much time with words. So he makes it very clearly and straight to the point. But I would imagine that when he was talking, he was saying something like that. Oh, but see, with everything that you talked, with everything that you told me, it looks like to me that you are so aware of yourself. You know so much, and you're so highly informed about everything, about the laws of life. You know so much already that it's hard to believe that you think that you need new experiences to go through and, get over everything that you did. Didn't you do enough already? Why are you so worried about this? It is interesting that it is now that where we know a little bit more about how Otavio fell, right? And that's the title of the chapter, Otavio's downfall, right? What happened to his life? What happened to him? What did he do to feel this way, right? And then that's when he says, well, I wasted a wonderful opportunity to evolve, and I will tell you why I did so. And that's when he starts by saying, well, in previous lives, I had enormous debts. And after discarnating previously, I came to the gates of No Solar. I was assisted by a lot of people, brothers and sisters. They worked with me tirelessly. For 30 years, he prepared himself to return to Earth to work as a medium. Why? He says, wishing to settle my accounts and to evolve in some way. He doesn't explain exactly why he needed or he wanted to work as a medium, but with the problems that he had in a previous life, and if he needed to settle his record by caring of a lot of people, because a medium's work is not about himself, it's about giving the message to other people, consoling other people. So he prepared himself in No Solar to work as a medium. That was his preparation for about 30 years. There was no lack of truly sublime lessons or holy incentives for his imperfect heart. And remember No Solar, right? We see Narcisa there, right, in the chambers of rectification working. And she says, I need to work for 10 years so that I can be granted something that I really need to do. How many other people work there? Laura, right? Who else? Lysias, and all the other spirits who were planning to go back and reincarnate, right? How much time had they prepared to come back to Earth? And they came. And that's what Otavio is telling Andre here. Well, I was already here in No Solar previously. I prepared for 30 years, and now I'm coming back. And I have failed. And I'm telling you why. And he goes on, the folks in the Ministry of Communication did all they possibly could on my behalf. And there were these 6 spirit friends that came and said, well, I'm going to help you. We are going to help you. And we will make you be successful. Or will help you to be successful. We cannot make anybody else be successful. We can help. The responsible for our lives are ourselves. So it goes on. Technicians from the Ministry of Assistance accompanied me to Earth on the day before my rebirth. We remember on No Solar we had Laura coming back, right, to Earth. She was about to reincarnate, and there was this group of spirits who came back with her on Earth so to help her reincarnate. On the next book of this series, Missionaries of the Light, there's a whole chapter talking about a specific case of reincarnation, a generic case of reincarnation, but very specifically explaining how that works. So if you want to know a little bit more about this, go ahead, finish this book, read the other one, and someday in the future we will be here at Kardec Radio. Who knows, me, Francisca, anybody else, studying that book, which is also full of excellent stories, but more than stories, excellent reflections on our lives and our responsibilities. So, but Otavio goes on and says, well, he received a strong, a healthy body, and according to the spirits there in No Solar, he was to be granted a very important work in the area of consoling other spirits, right? Not only this discarnated spirits, but the spirits who were there, the incarnated spirits, us, who used to go or went to the Spiritist Center where he would be working on. And he explains it even more. I would be among the ranks of workers in charge of Brazil, encouraging their efforts and assisting ignorant, disturbed, or unhappy brothers and sisters. So he was, because of the amount that he was indebted to because of his previous lives, he would be in charge of the development of Spiritism, or at least the study of Spiritism in Brazil, encouraging the efforts of a lot of workers and also assisting ignorant, disturbed, or unhappy brothers and sisters. So Otavio's story is not, it's a story of a regular man, of a spirit, such as ourselves. But he was in charge of a group of spirits. He would be in charge of this group of spirits. And that's why he's talking here about missionaries. Right? Maybe we are not in the kind of mission that Otavio was, but we all have our own missions. Be it in our family, be it a small mission in the Spiritist Center, be it just to, open the Spiritist Center at a certain time. That is a mission. If the Spiritist Center is not open and comes a person, the Spiritist Center is not open at the time when it was supposed to be open, our mission is not being correctly fulfilled, right? So, but he goes on. He was not supposed to get married. Very important here. Not because it might interfere with his mediumship. Because some people think, I know a lot of mediums who are not married. So to be a good medium, should I not be married? No. It's not because it might interfere with the mediumship, but because his own particular case demanded that I not marry. His particular case was the case that if he got married, it would not allow him to do the type of work that he needed to do on that specific reincarnation. So that is very important to say, because one thing has nothing to do with the other. Right? If I am married, I can still be a medium and I perform my duties, but I will not be able to be doing that the majority of my time, because I will have my family and I need to take care of my family and I have my duties with my family. I would assume that everybody knows that, but sometimes it can become a certain type of discussion that leads nowhere, right? If you really have a mission in being a medium, let's say a Divaldo Franco, right? Or a Chico Xavier, talking about these Brazilian mediums, and Chico Xavier specifically, the medium that psychographed this work that we are studying right now, they didn't marry. But they focused all their energy, and he focused all his energy in his work, in mediumship, in the spiritist groups that he went to, in providing help and focusing on helping the others. He would not have been able to do the same type of work if he were married. He could do probably, a quarter of the work. If we have almost 500 books psychographed by him, he probably could have psychographed, 30, 40 books, because he would be doing his task the best he could, also with his family. But for his work, his specific type of work, he decided, I am not going to marry. And that particularity of his case was decided with him in the spiritual realm before he was incarnated. So that was what he was supposed to do, and that he agreed to that when he before he incarnated. And he goes on, even though he would need to be single, at the age of 20, he would welcome the 6 friends who had worked so hard for him in No Solar. They would come into my life as orphans. He was greatly indebted to these spirits, and this provision, or this situation, would not only be a pleasant means of redemption for him, but also a guarantee of victory through his work of assisting them. So it was, I have the responsibility, but with the responsibility, I receive back more provisions so that I can give more back, and so on and so forth. And so they would be evolving together. He would assist the spirits who would be around him would give him strength for him to go on, and this would be a very, very healthy circle of love and redemption, and this in turn would guard his heart against imprudence and distraction. And this distraction here, the vanity that he talked about, right? Because such a demanding way of life, well, taking care of 6 orphans, right? Very demanding, would keep him from succumbing to degrading ideas regarding sex and unrestrained ambition, which is, once again, the imprudence and the vanity which all lead or can all lead to this. And it was also decided that his new activities would begin with much sacrifice, so that any prospective love from a possible wife wouldn't weaken his energy for achievement. So all this work would be so demanding that he would say, well, I cannot have a wife, or any prospective love from a possible wife would not weaken his energy for achieving what he would need to do. His task wouldn't be enslaved to capricious worldly situations that were far outside Jesus' designs, and above all, so that the impersonal nature of his service would be maintained. So it would not be possible for him to have his mind focused in one person, right? Personalized. It would be 6 people, right? And more than that, on the Spiritist Center, to everybody that would look for him. And we all know that once we have a husband or a wife, there needs to be a personal connection to those. And then with that come naturally, and that's not wrong, right? It's the complete opposite. It is correct that we have wives, that we have husbands, and it will need to be personal. It's me with a connection to another person, one-to-one, right? So, but the impersonal nature of his service, his need. Remember, we're not talking about everybody here. We're talking about this specific case, right? So in his case, there would be no need, and actually, it would be demanded of him that he would not marry. That can be tough, and it was tough on his case, right? So he goes on. Consequently, over the years of his spiritual growth, he would be sent more and more relief, material relief from No Solar, to the degree that I demonstrated self-denial, detachment from ephemeral possessions, and disinterest in gratifying the senses. So the more he detached himself from the material life, really paying attention to the spiritual growth of these 6 and of all the others that were looking for him in his work, he would receive more and more material help from No Solar, so that this would allow him to go on performing and doing the work that he used to do. And if we go and know a little bit more about any of the great spirits who are doing charitable work, the amount of sacrifice of time that they have. Let's go Mother Teresa. Let's go Chico Xavier once again. And name it. We can name it. Let's look how much they gave up of their own lives. And let's look, because of how much they gave up on their own lives, how much did they receive so that their work was able to be done and performed. It is as if the more we detach from material life, more material goods come not to me, but to be used towards the other ones that need more. And that's what this thing shows us, how this process works. Once we don't know if we are going to be able to help other people, to help the ones that are in need, and this material help always comes, always comes. We need to work for it, but it always comes once we really demonstrate this self-denial, the detachment from ephemeral possessions, and disinterest in gratifying our senses, in gratifying the senses. This would, he finalizes, in turn enable him to progressively intensify the sowing of love entrusted into his hands. Like we said before, this would be a healthy circle of love and redemption. Love and redemption, right? So he loves and he redeems himself by giving love to others, and then he receives love back, and then this allows him to have more energy to sow more love, and this circle goes on and on. This was all laid out to him. He came back, not only promising loyalty to his instructors, but also pledging the assurance of his devotion to those 6 spirit friends to whom he owed so much, even now, he says. Not only in the past, but at that moment when he was talking. He pauses. He sighs deeply and continues. But too bad. I forgot about every single one of my commitments. He forgot everything. And by forgetting here is not that forgetfulness of naturally when we come back to earth and we forget who we were in the previous existence and who we what we need to do very specifically. But it's that forgetfulness, the wishful forgetfulness. Not wishful, the forgetfulness that I want to forget. I am seeing right in front of my eyes what I need to do, and I don't do it. Oh, forget about it. As if I am not seen and out of sight, out of mind, right? And that's what he basically does with the rest of his life once he reaches the age of performing and doing what he needed to do. He goes, my benefactors in No Solar placed him alongside a true servant of Jesus, his mother, who had been a Christian spiritist since her youth, right? So she was probably one of the very first families, and they were one of the very first families of spiritists in Brazil. And that's why this mission. So we're talking here, he's about 40. The book was printed in about 1945. He was around 40 at that time when he discarnated. So let's say 1890, more or less, when he was born. His mother was already a spiritist, and Spiritism arrived in Brazil a few years after the very first book of Spiritism was published, the Spirit's Book, in 1857. So Spiritism got in Brazil more or less in 1859, 1860, 65. There were already some translations, and some Spiritist groups were already being founded, and there were some publications and so on. So his family was one of the very first. Therefore, he would have a mission of starting this process. And maybe because he didn't start, Spiritism took a little longer to develop, although it was quick to some degree. But maybe he would be another one, right, to help develop and spread the Spiritist message around Brazil even faster than it was. So his father, he says, was a materialistic, or had materialistic tendencies. However, he was a moral man, which is also to say that there is no need to be a spiritist to be a good person. There is no need to be a Christian to be a good person. There is no need to be of any religious background to be a moral man. His father had materialistic tendencies, but he was a moral man. So why is he telling us that? He's saying that, okay, I had a very good background. I had a family who raised me, teaching me how to behave with moral principles. And in his specific case, a spiritist. His mother discarnated when he was 13. And he received the first calls from the higher realms when he was 15. So when he was 15 years old, he already started noticing that he was a medium and he was receiving calls. I mean, spirits were probably trying to talk to him. He was probably already seen some spirits. That was how early his call was given to him. At that time, his father remarried when he was about 15. And his stepmother also offered a lot of help and kindness towards him. But he already started to assume an attitude of false superiority towards her. Oh, I know more than you. No, I have this mediumship, I can see spirits, and I know much more than you. His mother then started showing up to him. My birth mother, he says, directed sacred appeals to my heart from the invisible world, but to no avail. So he was seeing his mother. His mother was talking to him. I can imagine what she was saying. My son, don't do this. She is your new mother. Take care of her. She is being so kind to you. But I was very rebellious and complained all the time, he says. Some relatives, because remember his father had materialistic tendencies, so probably he would not take him to a spiritist center. So some relatives took him to a spiritist center that had an excellent evangelical orientation, a place where his faculties could be put to use for the needy and suffering. So these relatives took him to a spiritist center so that he could develop and put these faculties to use to start doing the work that he needed to do. So everything was more or less going according to plan exteriorly. However, what was he doing? He was rebelling and complaining all the time. And he says he lacked the character of a loyal and faithful worker. How loyal and faithful workers are we? Oh, I'm not going to the Spiritist Center today. It's raining. Oh, it's snowing too hard. Oh, it's too hot. Oh, no, I had a problem, and I'm not going to the Spiritist Center. How loyal and faithful worker I am? We have this discussion at our Spiritist Center here from time to time. Let's say, oh, it's raining too much, or oh, it's a lot of snow. Do you go to work when it's snowing? We ask, right? We ask ourselves, do we go to work when it's snowing outside? Do we go to work and work outside if we need to? When it's raining a lot, when it's very cold? So why not go to the Spiritist Center? Whatever it is. So we need to really stop to think how much of loyalty I put into the work of the Spiritist Center towards my own spirituality. How faithful of a worker. How can other people trust my work, what I am doing? Can they trust when I say that I'm going to do this? And he says, my refusal to trust in my spirit guides and my pronounced propensity for criticizing what others did drove me to an unpleasant standstill. This is another thing. I do my part, but he is not doing. Oh, I did this, but she didn't do that. Criticizing. If the other person didn't do, we need to find who can do it. Don't criticize. Let's go and do it. Let's find a way to do it, but not criticizing. And I can't trust the spirit guides, in his case here, and I can't trust those people who are around me every day, studying together with me, then everything can become very, very unpleasant. And what do we need to do? We need to work. And that's when sometimes things stop functioning well simply because I complain so much, I criticize so much, and I waste time on those things instead of using that time that I criticized, complained, rebelled instead of working. Shouldn't we be working instead of doing those three things? Rebelling, complaining, and criticizing? I think we could get a lot of things done if we didn't do that as much as we usually do. Then he goes on, my esteemed friends in invisible realms encouraged me to serve, but in his unwholesome vanity, he doubted them. And these calls, they continue. They don't stop. But he started interpreting them as hallucinations. And then he went to a doctor. He stopped believing in what he was taught. And then he sought out a doctor. And the doctor said, well, you need sex. Once again, I just talked about being married, right? It is natural. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It is the way for us to grow as a family, to improve ourselves. The same way is the sexual activity. It is something natural. Every single creature in the world needs sex in a way or another to reproduce, to grow, and there is no problem in it. His case, however, he knew that if he started going that path, it would make him astray from the path that he needed to go. So he needed to recognize that in his life. How do we do that, though? Right? He had all his friends to talk to. He was in a spiritist center. I know it can be a very tough call to make, but in his case was needed. What is our case? What are we doing with the energies of sex in our lives? He goes on. I reached the age of 19 and I yielded to the unbridled abuse of my sublime faculties. These faculties, the sexual faculties, these are sublime faculties, not to be abused, but to be used when necessary, when needed. Once again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with sex. Nothing. It is a natural energy. We all have it, but we need to understand what to do with these energies. When to use, how to use, and what for to use. That was his problem. He didn't know how to use. He misused it. That's when he says, I wanted to force the harmony between sinful pleasure and spiritual duty. He wanted to force the sinful, the pleasure that was from guilt in spiritual duty. I have my spiritual duties and I want to force these two things together. And this alienated me more and more from the evangelical teachings that friends from the higher spheres were ministering to us. So it was not to say that he didn't know. He knew it. He just was forgetful. He just took out of his sight and naturally took out of his mind, at least the exterior mind. And then he turns 20 and his father dies also. With this sad occurrence, 6 unfortunate children were orphaned because when his father married again, his stepmother brought 3 little ones under his guardianship. And now he had 6 to take care of. the poor widow begged for his help. And he says something that goes really deep. He never even pretended to accept the redemptive duties for which I was destined. So he didn't even pretend that he wanted to accept those duties. So he probably had just said, I don't care. These are not my sons. These are not my children. That's maybe what he said. He didn't even pretend to say, oh no, I will take care of it. I can start taking care of them and maybe walk away. No, he says, he was probably very straightforward when she asked for help, and he's just moved away from it. And then only after only 2 years of this second widowhood, his stepmother was taken to a leper colony, which was very common in Brazil at that time. And she got very sick. And these days, when it happens, usually people stay at home. But at that time, they would be sent to colonies. And then, with terror of that thing that was happening, he abandoned those little orphans forever, without reflecting on the fact that I was handing my generous creditors from Nosso Lar over to an uncertain fate. So he just moved away from these children, never seen them again, doesn't even know what happened to them. Hopefully they got treated well. They probably needed to go through a certain time of suffering, but it wouldn't need to be from Otavio. But Otavio didn't care, left them away, and those were the spirits who helped him in Nosso Lar before he incarnated. And then he finalizes by telling the last part of his story, last 20 years of his story, when he got married forcefully because he committed a dishonorable act, probably impregnating this woman, and he needed to get married. But even then, the calls from the spiritual world never stopped. They were still trying to get him back and say, hey, you still have time to do at least a little bit. Let's go, let's work. But he kept forgetting his duties more and more. Every attempt at spiritual accomplishment became more difficult. It is as if we're going down in darkness, in a very, very deep hole, and to climb up is much, much harder every time. And so the tragedy that I had created for my own torment continued. He created his own torment. We remember Telesforo telling us in one of the previous chapters, we need to stop teaching people about the eternal punishment when more and more what happens is we are the own creators. We are the creators of our own personal hells. We are the ones who are responsible for creating these situations to ourselves because we forget the duties to what we had committed to before reincarnated, and sometimes even here on incarnation, right? When we incarnate. For example, he got married, right? Naturally, it was a terrible situation for himself because it was not planned by himself. So he doesn't know what this woman is. And she says, right, his wife, to whom I had gotten married only for unspeakably lustful purposes, was a creature far beneath my spiritual level. So maybe it was at this moment when he needed to do something. If he couldn't do for a lot of people, let's at least try to do for this person who I am connected to right now, so I don't create even more problems for myself. But he was not able to do so. Why? Because he was destroying his own life with his own hands again and again, making the same mistakes in the past. So at every single moment of our lives, we can really use that quote from Chico Xavier when he says, I cannot go back and undo my present, right? Start over from the past, but I can at any moment of my life start anew to create a better future for myself. In Otavio's case, which is not judgmental on our side, he is telling his own story. And we need to look at his story thinking about our own story. What are we doing differently than he did? This woman was far beneath his spiritual level, so he knows himself a little bit, and he knows who she was right now. Right? He is telling this story now at that very moment, or he was telling Andre the story at that very moment with his knowledge at that specific moment. So he knows who that woman was or who that spirit is. And he says that she was bound to a monstrous spirit and attracted that spirit to play the role of his son. The company of those 6 affectionate children would have contributed significantly to his moral security, but he had relegated them to the street. It would have been hard materially, physically speaking, but morally, he would be way more secure because he would be thinking of those spirits, of those kids, of those children. But now he didn't have that moral security anymore. He relegated them. So his spouse and his son were put in charge of exacting their revenge. So it seemed to him. So looking at that moment with guilt, remembering those 6 children who would have been his moral security, now he looks at those spirits, his wife and his son. It was as if they were exacting their revenge, demanding revenge, calling for, oh, you didn't take care of those kids? Now you're going to have to deal with us too. They both, he finalizes, tormented him to the end of his days, whereupon he returned here to No Solar, right? He is speaking about No Solar, barely having reached the age of 40, consumed by syphilis, alcohol, and financial problems, having done nothing for his eternal future, and having constructed nothing in the arena of the good. He, as he said, wasted his opportunity. How are we doing with our own lives? What are we doing? Right? What can we take from Otavio to really look upon myself and say, oh, maybe I should pay attention more on this side, more on that side. Maybe I should stop and think more about this or about that. It is a story of a man that can relate to any human being, woman or man. It really doesn't matter because it's the human history. We need to take care and be careful with the choices that we are making. And once we make the choice, make the best out of it, independently of what it was. Even if it was not something that I had chosen for myself before being born here. But we need to assume that we took that and that we need to go and follow through what I chose so that I can, differently than Otavio's story here, do something for our eternal future in constructing something in the arena of the good. And he, after saying this, wipes his moist eyes and concludes, as you can see, as we can see, he fulfilled all his desires, but he didn't fulfill the will of God. What is the will of God here? It's not what God wants by pointing a finger. No, it was his choice together with those spirits before incarnating. So it was not demanded by God in the way of, oh, you have to do this. No, we choose before coming here. If we can, we choose. Otavio could, and he chose together with those spirits. And after coming here, he said, oh, I chose, but I don't want to do it. God says, that's okay. We have, and you have, your free will. We have our free will. We choose what to do, when we want to do, what we want to do. However, coming back to the beginning, with great powers come great responsibilities. If I choose something, I will have to be able to handle the consequence of what I'm doing. That is why he finishes. He failed and exacerbated his old debts. He not only failed, he increased his own debts. And he falls silent, as though something invisible had closed his throat. What can he say more than what he just said, right? It is very harsh. It is very deep. It is profound. And it's a very good reflection on our duties as human beings, but also as spiritists in a spiritist center. Andre embraces him with brotherly sympathy, eager to offer his heart encouragement. But Isaura caressed the side of his head, just like that gentle breeze that her name evokes, and says, don't cry, my son. Jesus doesn't withhold the blessing of time from us. Be calm and courageous. You need to settle down. Be calm. Now you need to reflect, to think about, but you also need to be brave, because the consequences will come. But no, don't think about it right now. Just be calm. There will be a lot of time. Jesus will always grants us time. So there will come a time when everything will be all set. We just need to calm down and be brave. Because as Jesus himself told to us, be brave, be courageous. I won over the world. So he said to us also, you can do what I do and much more. So we can also win. It just takes time and us acting on time, being calm and being courageous to win over ourselves, our difficulties, and our problems. In recognizing, Andre finalizes, her affection, Isaura's, this golden woman, affection for him. He meditated on divine goodness, and hopefully we are also meditating on divine goodness, whose sublime hymn is echoed in motherly love, being probably the most beautiful representation of the love of God for us, is a motherly love, even in the regions beyond the grave. Love never dies, and hopefully our love for studying, for improving ourselves, and the love of one another never dies within ourselves. And I here stop, hoping that next week we are back to another chapter of the messengers in our home, with a lot more of love in our hearts. Have a great week, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.